I want to ask you something that has bothered me for a long time. Why do people who love God, who pray every single day, who read their Bible, who fast, who go to church every week, why do so many of them still wake up every morning thinking about money? Not about God, not about their family, about money, about what they owe, about what's coming due, about how they are going to make it through this month. That contradiction used to bother me so much I couldn't sleep at night. And then I found something in the Psalms that changed how I read the entire Bible, something I had walked past dozens of times, something sitting right there in plain sight in a psalm most people have heard, but almost no one has understood the way it was meant to be understood. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you is not a formula, it's not a ritual, it's a position, and when you understand what that position means, you are going to realize that the door you have been knocking on was never actually locked. But before we go there, I need you to do one thing right now. If this kind of teaching feeds your spirit, if this is the kind of word you need to hear, subscribe to this channel right now. Not for the algorithm, because what I'm going to show you in this video has a continuation. What happens after the 3 days is something I will cover in the next video, and it is the part most people never hear. You need to be here when it comes. Subscribe now and stay with me. Because here is the first thing I need you to understand, and most people never get past this. The reason faithful people stay in debt is not a lack of faith. It is a lack of position. There is a difference between a person who is standing at a door and a person who has a key. Both of them want in, both of them are trying, but only one of them is operating from the right place. The one without the key can pray at that door for years. He can cry, he can fast, he can beg, and the door will stay closed, not because God is ignoring him, but because he never understood that the key was already in his hand. Now here is the first loop I want you to hold in your mind, and I will close it before this part ends. David wrote one of the most direct financial promises in all of Scripture, not a vague promise, a specific one, a personal one that he backed with his own lifetime of observation, and the way he wrote it tells you something critical about the position he was standing in when he wrote it. Most people read that promise as comfort. I'm going to show you it's a covenant. But first, debt. Let me tell you what debt really is. Debt does not start in your bank account. Debt starts in what you believe about yourself. It starts in the agreements you've made, unconsciously, silently, daily, about who you are, what you deserve, and whether God's promises are actually for someone like you. Every morning when the first thought in your mind is about what you owe, that is a declaration. Every time you say, I can't afford it, every time you say, money is always tight for me, every time you say, I'll probably always struggle, that is a declaration. And the spiritual realm responds to declarations, not to your bank balance, to what you are declaring about yourself. Most believers are speaking against their own covenant every single day without realizing it, and then they wonder why God seems silent. God is not silent, but you have been broadcasting something that contradicts what he already promised. And those two things cannot occupy the same space at the same time. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. But first, I need to show you something about the way David prayed. Because there is one thing David did that almost no one talks about, and it is the entire reason his prayers worked. He didn't just pray differently, he stood differently. He spoke from a different place. When David wrote, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," he didn't say, "I hope the Lord will be my shepherd one day." He didn't say, "Lord, please be my shepherd." He didn't ask. He declared, present tense, as fact, as a current reality, not a future hope. Why does that matter? Because the position you speak from determines what you can receive. A request says, I need this, and I am waiting to see if it comes. A declaration says, this is already true, and I am standing in it. Those are not just two different prayers. They are two different identities. And I want you to hold that thought, because in a moment I am going to show you a specific psalm that carries a promise so direct, so unqualified about provision, that the first time I read it as a decree instead of a request, something in me shifted. In the best way. Hold on. There is a man I knew. I'll call him Marcus, 43 years old, owned a small business, worked hard his entire life, went to church every Sunday, prayed for his finances for 12 years. 12 years of asking God to break the cycle of debt in his family. His father died in debt. His grandfather died in debt. And Marcus was certain he would die in debt too. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't irresponsible. He was faithful. He was doing everything right. And nothing was changing. When I sat with Marcus and asked him what he actually prayed when he prayed about money, he told me word for word. He said, "Lord, please help me. I don't have enough. I'm struggling. I need you to provide." I told him that prayer is a confession of lack, not a declaration of covenant. He looked at me like I had said something offensive, because he had been praying that prayer for 12 years, and no one had ever told him that the problem wasn't the God he was praying to. It was the position he was praying from. You are not a beggar at the gate. You are an heir to the covenant. Those are two completely different people standing in two completely different places, and God cannot give you an inheritance while you are sitting in the posture of someone who does not believe they belong at the table. And here is what I need you to understand about debt before we go any further. Debt does not start in your bank account. It starts in what you believe you are. It starts in the silent agreement you made. Maybe years ago, maybe as a child, maybe the day you first looked at your parents and decided their ceiling was your ceiling too. David understood something Marcus had never been taught. That there is a covenant, a spiritual contract, signed before your name was ever written in a bank's database, and that covenant makes a very specific claim about the righteous, not the perfect, the righteous, the ones who belong to God. And this is where Psalm 37 comes in. I want you to say this number out loud right now, 37. Psalm 37, write it down if you have something nearby. This psalm is not a poem, it is a covenant document. It is one of the most direct promises in all of Scripture about the financial condition of the person who belongs to God. And it doesn't hedge, it doesn't condition, it doesn't say maybe. Verse 25, David says, "I have been young and now am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging for bread." David is not expressing a wish. He is reporting what he personally witnessed across his entire lifetime. He is standing up as a witness and saying, "I watched, I paid attention, and in all my years, I never saw it happen to the righteous." Now I'm going to close the first loop I opened and open a larger one. If David, who witnessed the full span of God's faithfulness, never saw the righteous forsaken, and you are righteous through covenant, then the question is not whether God is willing to provide. The question is, from what position are you standing when you approach the promise? Because your position determines your access, not your effort, not your track record, not your credit score, your position. And most people, Marcus included, have been approaching the promise from the wrong position. Here is the new loop. David didn't just know this psalm. He knew what it meant to stand in present tense. He didn't declare what God might do. He declared what God is, right now, today, in this moment. And that distinction is not poetic. It is structural. It is the mechanism by which the promise is activated. I'm going to show you exactly why that is in the next section. And when you see it, you are going to understand why 12 years of prayers from the wrong position produce 12 years of the same result. Go to the comments right now and type the number 37. Just that. That is your declaration that you are entering this covenant today. Not a wish, not a prayer request, a covenant declaration. Type 37. And if someone you know is carrying this weight, the weight of financial shame, of cycles that repeat across generations, of the exhaustion of trying and still not getting free, share this video with them right now. They need to hear this. The door didn't change, the lock didn't change. Marcus just stopped knocking and used the key that was already in his hand. Let me show you exactly what changed for Marcus. After our conversation, Marcus didn't change how often he prayed. He didn't change which psalm he read. He changed one thing, the position from which he spoke. Instead of saying, "Lord, I don't have enough," he said, "Lord, you declared over my life that the righteous will not be forsaken. I am standing on that promise, not asking you to fulfill it in the future, declaring that it is already true." That sounds like a small shift. It is not a small shift. That is the difference between a man who shows up to his own table as a guest hoping to be seated, and a man who sits down at his own table as the owner who set it himself. And I want to address something right now, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, "But Rabbi, I don't feel righteous. I've made mistakes, I've failed, I'm not sure I qualify for this covenant." I need to stop you right there. Because the moment you say that, you have just accepted the same agreement that has kept families in poverty for generations. and you passed it on in your mind before you even finished the sentence. Righteousness in the covenant is not a moral score. It is not a performance review. It is a relational position. It is the position of someone who belongs to God, who has turned toward God, who is in relationship with God. That is you. If you are here watching this, praying, searching for something real, that is you. And no debt, no mistake, no history cancels that position unless you abandon it yourself. The voice that tells you this isn't for you is not the voice of God. That voice is the agreement you made with lack, and that agreement was signed, maybe by you, maybe by your parents, maybe by your grandparents, the first time someone in your line accepted the identity of someone who will always struggle. That is not your inheritance. That is a lie that wore your family's face for long enough that it started to feel like truth. David didn't write Psalm 37 for perfect people. He wrote it for the righteous, for the ones who are in right relationship with God, regardless of what their bank account says about them. And this is why the psalm does not begin with a promise. It begins with a command. Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. Verse 1. The word in Hebrew for fret, kara, means to burn inwardly, to be consumed from the inside, to be on fire in your chest about what you see in the world around you. David's first instruction is, stop burning inside. Not because the debt isn't real, not because the situation isn't hard, but because the inward burning is itself a declaration. Every time you are lying awake at 3 a.m., running numbers in your head, that is chara. Every time you open your banking app with a knot in your stomach before the screen even loads, that is kara. Every time you hear about someone else's blessing and feel that familiar sting of why not me, that is kara. And David says, as the very first instruction of this entire covenant psalm, stop. Because the fire of anxiety about money is your spirit broadcasting a message. And the message is, I believe the lack is more real than what God promised. You cannot receive the provision of the covenant while your inner voice is constantly testifying against it. Now I want to close the loop I opened earlier about the present tense, about why David said, the Lord is my shepherd, and not, I hope the Lord will be. In Hebrew thought, the present tense in declaration is not just grammatical, it is an act of occupation. When you declare something in the present tense, you are claiming territory. You are saying, this is the reality I inhabit right now, not the reality I am waiting for, the reality I already live in. When David said, I shall not want, he was not predicting a future he hoped for. He was refusing to accept the alternative reality. He was closing the door on the narrative of lack while opening his mouth to speak the covenant reality into his present tense. Most believers live in two tenses at the same time. They declare the covenant in Sunday worship and confess the lack on Monday morning. And then they wonder why nothing is moving. You cannot have both simultaneously. The tense you live in the most is the reality you are building. This is not a motivational concept. This is a spiritual law that runs through the entire scripture, and Psalm 37 is one of its clearest expressions. Now I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Elena. Elena is 61 years old, retired teacher, 3 adult children. She had spent her entire adult life making sure everyone else was okay. She gave generously. She tithed faithfully. She never missed a Sunday. And at 61, she found herself with $34,000 in credit card debt that had quietly accumulated over 8 years of emergencies, family needs, and things she couldn't say no to. She came to me not asking for a miracle. She came asking why. Why, after a lifetime of faithfulness, was she sitting in this much debt at this stage of her life? She wasn't looking for an excuse. She wanted to understand the mechanism. I asked her one question. Eleanor, when you pray about your finances, what exactly do you say? She said, I ask him to forgive me for the mistakes I made, and I ask him to help me find a way out. There it is. She was praying for forgiveness for something God had already forgotten, and she was asking for help from outside herself, as if she were a stranger knocking on a door when the covenant had already placed her inside the house. She had a right to the table. She just didn't know she was allowed to sit down, and there was something else. She told me that when she prayed about money, she always felt ashamed. She said, I feel like I shouldn't even be bringing this to God, like it's too small for him or too embarrassing. That shame was not humility. That shame was the agreement. It was the voice that says, People like you don't bring this to the covenant table, and she had mistaken that voice for reverence. I gave Elena the same instruction as Marcus. 3 days. Psalm 37, morning and night, out loud. But I added one requirement that I want you to hear clearly. I told her, Elena, for these 3 days there is something you must stop saying. This is not optional. This is not a suggestion. This is the part of the practice that matters as much as the reading itself. For 3 days you do not say the words, I don't have enough. Not in prayer, not in conversation, not even in your own thoughts if you can catch them. Every time you hear yourself about to say those words, you stop and you replace them with this. The Lord is my shepherd. I do not lack. Present tense. Not, I will not lack. Not, I believe I won't lack. I do not lack. This is not positive thinking. I want to be absolutely clear about that. Positive thinking tells you to feel better about your circumstances. This is the opposite. This tells you to declare the covenant reality over your circumstances, regardless of how you feel. The feeling is not the point. The position is the point. Elena did it, not because she felt it. She told me afterward, she said, Rabbi, the first day I felt like a fraud. I didn't believe a single word I was saying. I was $34,000 in debt and I was saying I do not lack, and it felt like the most dishonest thing I had ever uttered. I told her, that discomfort is the covenant bumping up against the agreement you have lived in for years. It is supposed to be uncomfortable. That friction is not a sign that it isn't working. It is a sign that it is. She kept going. On the second day, something happened that had nothing to do with money. She called her oldest daughter, whom she hadn't spoken to in 7 months after a painful argument, and for no reason she could articulate, she felt moved to reach out, not to discuss finances, not about anything specific, just to say, I love you. I'm thinking about you, the daughter answered. They talked for 2 hours. Something that had been broken for 7 months was restored in one afternoon. Eleanor told me, I don't know why that happened in the middle of a financial practice, but the peace that came through that conversation, it was like a wall came down that I didn't even know was there, and behind that wall was room, just room, space I hadn't felt in years. The money came later, not on day 3. 8 days later, a former colleague reached out about a part-time tutoring role that covered more than her minimum payments. Not a windfall, a door that opened. But here is what you need to understand, and this closes the second loop I opened in the first section. The debt didn't start with the credit card. The debt started with the agreement that she was responsible for everyone's lack, and that her own needs came last. The covenant wasn't broken from God's side. It was occupied incorrectly from hers, and the moment she changed her position, not her budget, not her job, not her circumstances, something in the spiritual arrangement shifted first. The peace arrived before the money. In that order. Always in that order. Now I need to ask you something directly. If you are praying for provision every day, but speaking lack in every conversation, in every worried thought, in every anxious calculation, which one do you think the spiritual realm is responding to? It is responding to the one you declare with your ongoing position, not the one you request in a 5-minute prayer and then contradict for the next 23 hours and 55 minutes. You cannot hold an open door with a closed declaration. Psalm 37 is not a magic formula. It is a covenant document that only functions when you stand inside it, not outside it, looking in, hoping God will notice, inside it, as someone who belongs there. And before we move to the practice, I need to pause, because I know some of you have been carrying this for a long time, not just debt, but the weight that debt brings. The shame, the exhaustion, the isolation, the feeling that you cannot tell anyone how serious it really is, the sense that you are falling further behind while everyone else seems to be moving forward. If that is where you are, right now, leave your name in the comments below, just your first name. I read them. I pray over every single one. You are not a number. You are not a statistic. You are someone the covenant was written for. And stepping out of silence, putting your name in that comment, is the first declaration. It is you saying, I am here. I belong. I am claiming this. Leave your name right now and subscribe to this channel if you have not done it yet, because the next video addresses what happens after day 3, and that, I promise you, is the part almost no one talks about. It is also the most dangerous moment in the entire practice. When things start to shift, There is a specific mistake most people make that undoes the work of the 3 days. I will show you exactly what it is, but you need to be here. Subscribe now. Now I'm going to give you the practice, and I want to warn you ahead of time. It is not complicated, but it will cost you. The 3 elements are not equal in difficulty. The first one is easy. The second one is uncomfortable. The third one is the hardest thing I will ask you to do. The first element is the declaration. Every morning for 3 days, before you open your phone, before you check your messages, before you look at your bank account, you open to Psalm 37 and you read it out loud. Not silently, out loud. Why? Because spoken word in Scripture is never neutral. God spoke the world into existence. David spoke his Psalms. The promise in Scripture is consistently attached to the mouth, not just the mind. You read the entire Psalm, you don't skim, you don't summarize. You read it as if you are reading your own legal document, because you are. Then at night, before you sleep, you read it again. Same way, out loud. That is 3 days, 6 readings. But here is where most people stop, and this is why most people don't see results. The second element is the renunciation. For 3 days, 72 hours, you do not speak the language of lack. You do not say, I don't have enough. You do not say, I can't afford it. You do not say, I'm broke. You do not say, I'm always in debt. You do not say, money is always tight. You do not say, I'll never get out of this. Every single one of those sentences is a declaration, and you have been making those declarations probably for years, and then wondering why nothing is changing. I am not asking you to pretend the numbers aren't real. The numbers are real. The debt is real. But the numbers are downstream of something, and what they are downstream of is the identity you have accepted about yourself. For 3 days, every time you are about to speak lack, you stop, and you replace it with this sentence: God has prepared provision for me. I am walking toward it. That is it. Simple. But it will be harder than reading the psalm, because the language of lack is your habit. It is the water you swim in, and fish don't notice water until someone takes them out of it. The third element, and this is the one that will separate the people who see results from the people who try it and give up, is the renunciation of comparison. For 3 days, you do not compare your financial situation to anyone else's. Not your neighbor, not your sibling, not the person on social media, not someone from your church who seems to be blessed while you're struggling. Why? Because envy is a declaration that what God gave someone else is what you lack. And David addresses this at the very beginning of Psalm 37 for a reason. He doesn't start with the promise of provision. He starts by commanding you to stop looking at what others have, because the looking is the problem. The comparing is a form of fretting, chara, that inward burning that says, their portion proves mine is wrong. Your portion is not determined by what someone else received. Your portion is determined by the covenant that was written before you were born. Now I want to tell you about one more person. His name is Thomas. And his story is the one I want to leave you with, because it is the most honest one. Thomas is 57. He is not someone who gave up easily. He had tried everything. He had prayed, fasted, attended financial counseling at his church, read every book on biblical finance, spoken with his pastor multiple times. He was not lazy. He was not irresponsible. He was exhausted. When I shared this practice with Thomas, his response was, Rabbi, I've done practices before. Nothing works for me. That is a sentence I need you to pay very close attention to, because nothing works for me is not a report on the past. It is a declaration about the future, and Thomas had been making that declaration in slightly different words for years. I told Thomas, you are right that nothing worked, but the reason it didn't work is not because God withheld it from you. It's because every time you approached the practice, you approached it from the position of someone proving whether it works. You were testing God, not trusting the covenant. And those are fundamentally different positions. Thomas did the 3 days. He told me afterward that the first day he cried, not from peace, from grief. He said, I didn't even realize how much I had been speaking against myself. Every time I tried to stop saying the words of lack, I realized how constant they were. I was saying them in my head non-stop. It was like trying to hold back a river with my hands. That is the moment the practice works. By the way, not when it gets easy, when it gets honest. Thomas did not receive a financial breakthrough on day 3. he did not receive one on day 8. What he received on day 4 was the first morning in 11 years that he woke up, and the first thought in his mind was not about money, it was just silence, peace. He told me, "I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know my mind could be quiet about this." That peace is not a consolation prize while you wait for the real thing. That peace is the real thing, because the anxiety was never about money. The anxiety was about identity. And when identity shifts, when you genuinely begin to occupy the position of the righteous who are not forsaken, the inward burning stops. And in that silence, things start to move that couldn't move before. Thomas's financial situation began to change 3 weeks later. Not in one dramatic moment, in a series of small doors opening, a refinancing option he hadn't qualified for before, a raise he hadn't expected, a debt that was forgiven by a creditor who simply stopped pursuing it. He told me none of it was a miracle on its own, but together it was impossible to explain any other way. Here is what I want you to take from these 3 stories. Marcus, Elena, Thomas. Different ages, different types of debt, different histories, different levels of faith, but the same shift, from petition to position, not from weak faith to strong faith, from wrong position to right position. You are not here to beg God to remember you. He has not forgotten you. You are here to occupy the place that was prepared for you, and Psalm 37 is the declaration of that place. So here is what I am asking you to do, starting today. Tonight, before you sleep, not tomorrow, tonight, open to Psalm 37. Read it out loud, all of it. Do not rush. Read it as a document that belongs to you, because it does. Tomorrow morning, before your phone, before the news, before the bank app, before anything, read it again, out, loud. And for these 3 days, guard your mouth, not from everything, from one specific thing, the language of lack. Every time it rises in your throat, stop it. Replace it with this: God has prepared provision for me. That is your practice. 3 elements, 3 days. And let me be clear about something, because I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm telling you. This is not a guarantee that money will fall from the sky on day 3. That is not what the covenant promises. The covenant promises that the righteous will not be forsaken. That means the way is prepared. That means the doors will open. That means what was closed will begin to move. But you have to occupy the position to receive what the position has waiting. You cannot receive an inheritance while sitting in the posture of a beggar, not because God is withholding it, because you are sitting in the wrong chair. Get up, move to the right chair, and stay there. Now, before you go, I need 2 things from you. First, if you are carrying something heavy right now, debt, shame, fear, the weight of a cycle that has been in your family for too long, leave your name in the comments below. Just your name. I will pray over every name that I see. You are not alone in this. And stepping out of silence is itself an act of covenant. It is saying, I am here, I belong to this community, and I am claiming what God has for me. Leave your name right now. Second, subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, because what I'm going to cover in the next video is the most dangerous moment in this entire practice. What happens after day 3, what most people do wrong in the days that follow, and how that mistake can unravel everything the 3 days built. You need to be here for that. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. You did not find this video by accident. You are not a beggar at the gate. You are an heir who has been standing outside a door that was never locked. Open it. You are not asking. You are. Returning to what was always yours. Shalom, my friend, until next time.